It is often claimed that the ancient Hellenic comprehensive combat sport named Pankration, meaning all mastery, as in mastering all aspects of fighting, boxing, wrestling, kicking, and groundwork, was the predecessor of all comprehensive martial arts, including those of the Far East. But these assertions are often regarded as unsubstantiated or overtly nationalistic. And though there is merit to these criticisms, the real question remains: is Pankration the progenitor of all-encompassing combat sports, and did it influence the martial arts we know today? To answer these questions, we first need to look back at Greece's major initial non-mythological excursion to the east, which came under the rule of Alexander the Great, a campaign that ranged from Greece all the way to modern India. But a little-known fact is that even before Alexander, there were Greek people living in and around the region of today's Afghanistan. Persian kings Darius and Xerxes used Bactria as a land to which they could exile Greeks deemed to be too troublesome from southern Asia Minor and Libya. Today we can see an example of a Hellenic establishment in the ruins of Campir Tepe. This site was found in modern-day Uzbekistan, excavated in 1972. The Hellenistic plans of the foundations of the fortress coincide with Alexander's arrival in the region. The fortress held for nearly 400 years and was built in 3 phases: the Hellenistic, the Sakaparthian, and the Kushan, which we'll get to later in the video. But the most significant archaeological site for early Hellenistic culture in the east is Ai-Khanoum, in the Takhar province of Afghanistan. These ruins of an anonymous ancient Greek city were first officially discovered in 1961. The site dates between the late 4th to early 3rd century BCE, likely found under the rule of Seleucus or his son Antiochus. However, the city seceded from the Seleucid Empire by Diodotus, who was the first independent king of Bactria. What makes this site so important is the fact that it establishes a clear Hellenistic presence in the Asian region. Before the modern-day looting and destruction that transpired shortly after its discovery, archaeologists excavated and found a palace, a theater, and, most importantly for this topic, a gymnasium and a palestra. Palestra is where there is pali, which means wrestling or, more broadly, struggle and combat. This is solid proof that Hellenic combat sports were practiced in Asia, in a site considered to be the conduit for the influence of Greek art in the surrounding region, including India. The site was looted and almost completely destroyed during the Soviet-Afghan War, but certain artifacts were thankfully recovered, like the coin of Antiochus with the mint mark of Ai-Khanoum, or the inscription on the stele with Delphic maxims, one that states, "As a child, behave. As a youngster, be restrained. In middle age, be just. As an elder, be of good counsel. In the end, be without grief." But what about this other peculiar coin? What makes it so interesting is that the coin marks one of the earliest examples of what would become the fusion of Hellenistic and Indian artistic influences. On one side, in Greek script, it writes Basileos Agathokleos, and on the other, in Brahmi script, Rajan Agathokleesa, both translating to King Agathocles. The imagery is of Balarama Samkarsana and Vasudeva Krishna, both being the earliest unambiguous images of these Hindu deities. The Helleno-Indian cultural fusion leads us to the Yavana kingdom. First, let's look at the architecture. The remnants of the Budkara stupa versus an ancient Greek tholos, like we see in Olympia or Delphi. The pillar of Ashoka versus the Sphinx of Naxos. The Corinthian-style pillars. The Greek patterns of flame palmettes and other decorative elements. The Hellenistic influence is remarkable. But let's again look at the coinage. It all begins with this one, a 4th century BCE Athenian coin found in Pushkalavati, Gandhara, and we can see how this slowly changed to reflect Indian influence. Here is Apollodotus, the founder of the Indo-Greek kingdom, the first to rule solely on this subcontinent. Then the coin of King Demetrius I, with Hermes Caduceus on one side and elephant head on the other. We can even see how the accompanying images of Zeus changed over time as well. First, Zeus with Nike, then Zeus with Nike and an elephant, to then Zeus with Nike and the wheel of the law of Dharma, or the Dharma chakra. But speaking of Hellenic deities, let's also look at how mythology was represented in the region. This artifact is one of the most remarkable pieces found in Ai-Khanoum, called the Ai-Khanoum plaque. It is made of silver with gold inlays that display Anatolian goddess Cybele or Rhea and Greek goddess Nike on a chariot that is led by lions. In the sky, we see the rise of Helios, the god of the sun, as well as the Anatolian Greek representation of the moon and star. In fact, Hellenic religious figures remained in the region even after the fall of the Indo-Greek kingdom. This statue, for example, represents Athena in the style of Gandharan art, dating to the 2nd century CE. Another example is this representation of Atlas holding up a temple with a Corinthian pillar next to him. Mythology is also represented in theater. Take, for example, the comic mask of a gargoyle found in the Gandharan region, dating again to the 2nd century CE. But perhaps even more stunning is the fact that a fragment of a vase was found near Peshawar with a scene from the ancient Greek play of Antigone by the 5th century tragedian Sophocles. Hence, Hellenistic influence in art permeated through all art forms of mythology. But the Bactrian kingdom fell in the mid-2nd century BCE, while the Yavana kingdom fell in the early 1st century CE. Yet, that would not be the end of Hellenistic influence in the Asian region. In fact, it was only the beginning. Almost immediately after the invasion, the Yuezhi people were Hellenized. They began speaking Greek, using Greek script, and adopting the same Hellenic coinage and deities. Note that Greek people and communities continued to exist despite the change of regime. Here is a coin of the first self-declared ruler of the Kushan Empire named Heracles. He is wearing a Greek royal headband, and on the opposite side of the coin, the Greek goddess Nike is reaching out to crown him. On another coin, this one of Kanishka, we see the Greek god Helios and Greek writing and symbolism throughout. The Yuezhi people believed in a huge pantheon with Greek, Persian, and Indic deities. But it wasn't long until the Yuezhi accepted the Greco-Buddhist traditions left by the Yavana kingdom. In fact, even before the Yuezhi, the Greeks played an important role in spreading Buddhism during the Mauryan Empire, even as emissaries of Ashoka. Still, did you know that the very first anthropomorphic representation of Buddha was made in the style of Hellenistic art? This is the Menon casket of the 1st century CE, perhaps the earliest example of Buddhist iconography. Buddha is standing in a contrapostal pose with a bundled topknot and wearing a Greek himation. But how quickly was Buddhism adopted within the Kushan Empire? Remember that coin of Kanishka with Helios? This is a 2nd century CE coin again with Kanishka, but on the opposite side is Buddha. The Greek script writes Vodo, although today it is Buddha for Buddha. The Yuezhi played a huge role in the propagation of Buddhism, and with it, Hellenism, even in the Far East. In China, there is a fresco depicting Emperor Wu, who lived in the 2nd to 1st century BCE, worshipping Greco-Buddhist statues, while the fresco itself was actually made in the 8th century CE. But Greek culture had likely extended to China even before the introduction of Buddhism. Take, for example, this statuette, one of a Greek soldier wearing a Phrygian helmet found in the Tian Shan region that dates back to the 3rd century BCE. Perhaps even more striking is the Sampo tapestry. The date of this artifact is ultimately unknown, with scholars debating on whether it was from the 3rd century BC all the way to the 4th century CE. It is embroidered in Hellenistic style, featuring Greek mythology in the form of a centaur wearing a lion skin, and below, one who is likely a Greek or Greek Yuezhi blue-eyed soldier holding a spear. But even much later art depictions in Luolan in Xinjiang, China have survived, like this tapestry with who is likely Hermes holding his caduceus staff, and other figures displaying Greek artistic elements, like the wings that were a symbol of divinity and liminality. In Gandhara in South Asia, we find the only example I've seen of Heracles with wings sporting a sick mustache, from the 3rd century CE. Even far after the first centuries of the Common Era, we continue to find Hellenistic depictions of mythological figures and of Buddha, from the art of the Ajanta caves of the 5th century to the vine and grape scrolls of the roof tiles of 7th century Japan. The most prominent examples of the gradual Greek artistic influence are the evolutions of mythological figures. We can see the similarities of Fujin with the depiction of a wind god found in Kizil in Xinjiang, China, and we can see the similarities of this wind god with the representation of Greek Boreas or Voras from Greco-Buddhist art found in Hara, Afghanistan. Another great example, perhaps the most pertinent one, is the evolution of the protector of Buddha. This is a statue of Neo found in Japan. But before Neo, there was a different protector, or rather two different Vajrapani. These sculptures are from Tapa Shotor in Hara, Afghanistan. They were built in the 1st to 2nd century CE and abandoned in the 9th. These sadly no longer exist because they were destroyed only recently in 1992 by the Taliban. In one sculpture, Vajrapani is Alexander the Great, represented 400 to 500 years after his death. On the right, Vajrapani is Heracles, also known as Hercules, the son of Zeus and one of the two deific heroes credited as the creator of Pankration. Let's begin with Alexander the Great. Here he is again as Vajrapani, or bodyguard of Buddha. The whole relief is in Hellenistic style and dates to the 2nd to 3rd century CE. The Buddha with a mustache and topknot stands in front of Kasyapa, seated in a hut. Alexander the Great stands next to Buddha with his signature hairstyle and Greek clothing, holding the Vajra, which symbolizes a thunderbolt. But do you know which mythological hero Alexander often associated himself with? One is Achilles, since his mother was queen of the Molossians in Epirus, considered to be direct descendants of Achilles. The other, more often found to be linked with Alexander in text and in his iconography, was Heracles, who he believed was his ancestor from the side of his father. Heracles was tautologized with Alexander because he was a symbol of divine power, hence why he is found in the coinage even after Alexander's death, like this Greco-Bactrian coin of Demetrius I from the late 3rd to early 2nd century BCE. Within Heracles is the connection between ancient Hellenic and Asian combat sports and martial arts. Obviously, we know wrestling existed in India before the arrival of Alexander, but Hellenic influence may have perforated the rule set, and that is what is essential. The rules make the sport. I'll get into the evidence that suggests this later in the video. As mentioned earlier, a sculpture of Heracles was found in Hara, Afghanistan, in the role of Vajrapani to Buddha, while the goddess Taiki, or luck, is in place of Hariti. But what's even more important about this depiction of Heracles from the 2nd century is that he has cauliflower ears, a disfiguration that we all know is indicative of the participation of certain combat sports, particularly those associated with comprehensive martial arts that include groundwork, all of which are unique to Pankration in ancient Greek games. Heracles is the symbol of athletic competitions, as well as physical toughness, strength, cunning, and of course, victory. And we have rich imagery depicting Heracles all throughout the East. He is depicted in the form of Erethragna from Persian mythology, like this 2nd century statue of Heracles Kallinikos at Behistun. He is depicted as a Parthian hero, like this 1st to 2nd century statue found in Hatra, Iraq, and as a wrestler hero on the relief of these wrestler weights found in Gandhara from the 1st to 2nd century. As Vajrapani, he was the guardian of Buddha, the warlike protector. In the death scene of Buddha, it is Heracles that we see by his side, holding the Vajra and grieving. And this role of Heracles as protector led to his image being used as far as Tang Dynasty China, where we see a porcelain figure with Heracles' signature Nemean lion skin used as a tomb guardian in Sanxi. It is this form of Heracles that evolved into the Japanese figure of the Vajrapani, Neo. But let us focus on Heracles as the patron deity of athletic events and combat sports. From the Indo-Greek and Kushan periods, there are various reliefs of Greco-Buddhist art that display combat sport competitions. In this stone slab of two wrestlers found in Afghanistan and dated to the 2nd to 3rd century CE, we see wrestlers that are both wearing a wrestling belt, and on the top right corner we find the Kharoshthi letters, which read Minandrasa, Menandros, the savior, who is mentioned in the Buddhist text Milinda. Indeed, athletic contests played an important role in Buddhist lore and iconography. Prior to attaining enlightenment, Siddhartha trained and competed in athletic events, including combat sports, and the iconography reflects this story. A 3-tiered panel showcases Buddha, wrestling contests, and Corinthian pilasters dated to the 2nd to 3rd century CE. And for those of you following this channel, this motif of a wrestling competition surely looks familiar, doesn't it? It is because it can be found displayed on several different ancient Hellenic vases. And it is not just in iconography that we find combat sport contests in Buddhism. In several texts, there's word for both wrestling and the comprehensive combat of Pankration, in the Milinda, in the Harimvasha, and most extensively in the Mahabharata. In the video I did on ancient Hellenic wrestling, I spoke of the rules of the sport. A fall included throwing someone on their back and shoulders, flat on their stomach and shoulders, or holding them in place on the ground. All three fall conditions appear in these texts, and comprehensive combat with wrestling, striking with hands, elbows, knees, and kicks are all there. In the Mahabharata, there are descriptions of closed fist strikes to the body, hammer fists, and groundwork without ground and pound. Again, all in accordance with the rule set of Pankration. And just a reminder, for those misinformed thinking that Pankration was no-holds-barred brutality contests, it was not. That is a myth. Pankration had several rules and restrictions, and you can check out my content or academic articles for more information. Taking everything we've learned so far into account, let's look at a specific example of a combat sport from the region, the Khmer martial art named Bopearachchi, native to Cambodia. Bopearachchi was inscribed on the list of Intangible Cultural Heritage of UNESCO in 2022, despite some major gaps in the chronology of its practice. On the UNESCO website, it states that Bopearachchi dates back to the 1st century CE. However, there is no evidence to date it that far back. The earliest description I've been able to locate of Bopearachchi is from bas-reliefs and inscriptions in the Angkorian period, around 900 CE. Claims of it dating to the 1st century are usually again considered to be nationalistic, but there is definitely validity in the notion that Bopearachchi can be significantly earlier than the earliest surviving inscriptions. The Helleno-Indian influence in that region and the introduction of Buddhism could have played a key role in the development of this martial art. What's the biggest clue to this? The origins of Bopearachchi. According to legend, when a lion attacked a village, a brave warrior went to face the beast in close quarters. Through the struggle, he defeated the lion with a powerful knee strike to its midsection, instantly slaying the beast. The word Bopearachchi comes from the Cambodian Lbok Katao, which means to fight or strike a lion. But speaking of fighting pantherins empty-handed, where have we seen this before? Heracles, the slayer of the Nemean lion, the skin of the lion worn as a symbol of his successful completion of his very first labor, the event in which he founded Pankration. Having the origins of the regional martial art influenced by the myth of Heracles, but made unique to the region by means of how the lion was slain, a knee strike rather than a rear naked choke, coincides well with the Indo-Greek influence spreading simultaneously with Buddhism in the 2nd to 3rd century CE and onwards. Because even as late as the 9th to 12th century, we see Angkorian bas-reliefs with very familiar depictions. Wrestling and chokeholds with poses and garments similar to Helleno-Indic iconography, and even portrayals of martial training dances almost identical to those found in ancient Greece. Another important factor related to Bopearachchi is how it shaped and was shaped by other martial arts of the Southeast Asian region, like those of Thailand, and Muay Thai particularly has such striking similarities with Pankration that are very hard to overlook. The stances of Muay Thai and Pankration are practically identical. Same with some specific defensive guards, such as the colloquially named Long Guard and the Dracula Guard. Even the often used jab front kick called tip in Thai was called tiptain in ancient Greek. So all things considered, there is a continuum that makes the chain of influences possible for Pankration to reach all throughout Asia, though particularly in the Southeast Asian region, but it is still difficult to prove definitively. I'm often asked why I designed the channel's emblem to have the tiger rather than the lion, which actually existed in ancient Greece. I did so to pay homage to the Eastern martial arts that kept Pankration alive when it was all but lost in the West due to conquest and extermination. This is why I believe Pankration is not only Hellenic cultural heritage, but in fact worldwide cultural heritage. and it is about time UNESCO recognizes it as such. Before I go, I must mention a few things. One is that I am not an expert in the history of the eastern regions I've discussed during this video. I welcome any corrections to any statements I have made from actual experts of these territories. The second is that I do believe there is merit to researching for any links or similarities between Pankration and some medieval historical European unarmed martial arts. If you are an expert in this field or know someone who is, send me an email and we can collaborate either on a video, an academic publication, or both. Third is, this is not meant to lay claim to the artistic achievements of any culture or region. The intercultural influence accredits both, and indeed the influences went both ways in terms of Indo-Greek and Greco-Buddhist artwork. Finally, if you would like to back my research and content, consider supporting me on Patreon, where you'll find lectures on Pankration and ancient Hellenic history. If you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I have all the content I offer on Patreon available on Ko-Fi for single payment purchases. Thanks in advance for any potential support, and to all those who've supported me over the years. Cheers, everyone.